these things to put it on their news outlet. And the relationship between Iran and Russia is based on mutual respect, and Russia is an influential member of JCPOA, in which Iran's nuclear program is respected. Including enrichment, is respected. In nothing of that sort you're gonna find in the Iranian media, and it seems that recently, in the aftermath of during the war between Iran and Israel, they're making things up in order to somehow influence the relationship between Iran and Russia. Your take on that?
Yeah. Okay. So Axios's story is just on sources familiar with the matter. Doesn't say Russian sources, doesn't say Iranian sources, doesn't say diplomats, doesn't say anything. So you can't really take it, without a gigantic, a Roman caravan full of salt. I mean, because Axios has kind of a history of running fake stories, thinly sourced, that they seem almost primed to become a narrative, and often a narrative disinformation vehicle for U.S. intelligence. And sometimes in recent years, it seems they've gotten really weird with this. A whole lot of fake information, for instance, about what I've been concentrating on for the last few years, the Russian-Ukraine conflict, has come out. I mean, you continually have heard stories, and some of them have been broken in Axios, some of them others, about a peace deal, about Russia's ready to make concessions on this. That I remember one that Zaluzhny and the Russian commander-in-chief Gerasimov were sitting down, meeting secretly, making a ceasefire. None of this was true, right? None of it was even remotely true. It seems that there is an intentional muddying of the waters that just to disturb disinformation. I actually seem to wonder sometimes whether there's not some belief in line with, if you'll remember, during the George W. Bush administration, Karl Rove spoke about making our own reality, making the narrative the reality, and you'll be studying what we create, and we'll be making the next reality, something like that. It's bizarre. It almost seems that they think that if they create enough disinformation about something, there's a possibility that it may actually be picked up and become real. I mean, this is really bizarre because the English language media, right, only has so much penetration in foreign countries, right? I mean, yes, analysts study it, to know what the opponent is saying, but I mean, Putin doesn't sit down and listen to Axios, the New York Times or the Washington Post. He gets an intelligence briefing, right? And if there's anything important in the Western media, then that will be relayed to him in that briefing. It's bizarre, and it's not always easy to fully understand the motivations behind this. Now, it's not 100% impossible, right? But Russia is when it can be, when it hasn't been pushed into a corner by the West, acting outside the boundaries of international law, like it has been with Ukraine, right? With the government overthrown there by a U.S.-backed putsch in 2014 and so on. But Russia tends to be a kind of kind of have something stuck up their butt when it comes to international law, right? They try to really not only follow the form, but often follow the spirit of it as well. In that sense, not in a Western idea of it, but they're a very legalistic regime. Speaking of the political regime, not the negative connotation attached to the word when we talk about governments we don't like. This includes the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, right? Russia is a big adherent of that. As it must be said, is China, right? And one of the provisions of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty for signatories who are not nuclear powers is their inherent right to a civilian nuclear energy program and enrichment in that process. Russia believes that Iran has the right to a civilian nuclear program. Russia built one of Iran's biggest nuclear reactors, and they're in the process of expanding that at Bushehr. So this seems extremely unlikely to me. Now, I'm willing to believe that Russia would be on board with Iran limiting their enrichment, right, to normal civilian power plant levels. That was in the original JCPOA. I believe that is something that Russia would push. I do believe that both Russia and China would be against Iran getting a strategic deterrent, against getting a nuclear weapon. I think both Russia and China are probably offering mutual defense provisions, building up conventional forces, in particular air defense and electronic warfare. We know Putin says that when Russia and Iran were negotiating the end of their strategic partnership, that Russia offered Iran a mutual defense pact, and they offered them very extensive air defense cooperation, including domestic production of interceptors in Iran, and being connected with Russia's own air defense satellite and reconnaissance network, which is probably the most formidable in the world. And Iran said no. But I believe that particularly in the aftermath of the latest war, the latest 12-day war, if we're going to take Donald Trump's terminology, that Russia and China are probably both urging Iran to take either one or the other or both up and to develop a conventional deterrent, in particular air defense and electronic warfare, with the help of Russia or China or Russia and China, in lieu of people in the Iranian government who are almost certainly pushing them to race to the nuclear weapon as a strategic deterrent. So, would Russia be in favor of an agreement with the U.S. that forestalled further attacks and limited enrichment? Yes, that makes sense to me. And particularly, if it also included measures that made sure that they weren't seeking enrichment to levels to build a nuclear weapon. I think that's within Russia's stated positions, long-held opinions. But this would be such an extreme position. It would be a position of almost desperation to save Iran. And I don't think that Iran is actually in that position. Iran got hurt, but they hurt back. And it was, at the end of the day, the obviously the West's goals, regime change, destruction, as the primary goal, regime change. As a secondary goal, destruction of Iran's civilian nuclear enrichment in total. those goals weren't met, right? And it was the U.S. and Israel who tapped the mat first and asked for a ceasefire. So that tells me that Iran is not in a desperate position, and that it would be strange for Russia to then adopt a desperation position for Iran in negotiations when it doesn't seem necessary at the moment. So I would caution to be very cautious about this story. There's just been way too much intentional disinformation. I know of a lot of such disinformation, particularly in my focus for the last few years, but I'm sure that it is across the board and global, right? And this smacks to me of something like that. And until I see something from a Russian source verifying this, yeah, Axios. That's all I'm gonna say.
Mark, when it comes to the 12-day war between Iran and Israel, you mentioned that the main goal was regime change. And we learned from the Iranian president, his interview with Tucker Carlson, he said they wanted to assassinate him as well. And the attack on supreme leader of Iran, on the president of Iran, commanders, and most high-ranked people, they wanted to eliminate all of them in order to make some sort of chaos within the country and then do the regime change. Do you feel that if that was the main goal, and it seems that Netanyahu somehow could convince Donald Trump that Israel is able to do that. That's why Donald Trump gave him the green light to go against Iran, to attack Iran. How do you see the current situation? Netanyahu is in the United States talking with Donald Trump. What does he want? Does he want new attacks on Iran? Does he want somehow a collaboration in attacking Iran or something else?
Yes. Okay, so first of all, I mean, the first part, that there was an attempted decapitation strike. We know that they've admitted that. That's not even in question, right? They even had a fancy operation name for it. They called it the Red Wedding, which was a reference to a scene in a Game of Thrones, or if you're an actual book fan, the book A Storm of Swords, in the series by George R. Martin, where there is a treacherous wedding where the leaders, the top leadership of the one noble family is just wiped out in this assassination, betrayal scene, very bloody scene completely. And that's obviously what they were attempting to do. We had the Israeli defense minister go on Israeli TV, right, just in the days after the war ended, and admit that, well, they tried to kill the supreme leader, and no matter what Trump may be saying about, oh, it's his mercy then left him alive, the only reason he was alive is because they couldn't find him, right? And so it doesn't surprise me at all that this was also included Pezeshkian and other elements of the civilian political leadership. It is all really, not even questionable. And if you go once the attack began, the entire Western mainstream media was talking about regime change, right? I mean, all you have to do is Google regime change. Right? Washington Post was talking about it. The Economist was talking about it. The New York Times was talking about it. Everyone was talking about regime change as the real goal. It wasn't really a surprise. And in fact, the mainstream media was the commentariat, and it was almost pushing it. I mean, not almost. They were pushing it, right? They wanted to see regime change. They are an actor. They're the fourth estate. The media is an ideological actor, in Western governments. That's why they call them the fourth estate. They're not some disinterested objective observer, reporting things. They are often driving. And the conflict with Ukraine, they've been whipping why aren't you providing this weapon? Why aren't you providing that weapon? Putting pressure on politicians to do so. Very similar situation, I believe, in this, where they were actually trying to push the Trump administration to going all the way with regime change. And we also know that their operation to kill Iran's civilian nuclear scientists, they called Operation Narnia. So Operation Red Wedding and Operation Narnia, well, that tells us that whoever is naming these asinine things in the Israeli military political structures is a big fan of fantasy literature, right? Narnia is C.S. Lewis, Chronicles of Narnia. I'm not even sure what to think about that, but it was a fantasy, and it had very little relation to, reality. But we know there was a decapitation strike, and we do know that Mossad had extensive penetration of Iran, right? On the ground, drone operations, assassinations. They did get a number of the leaders of the IRGC, not as many as they were saying. Some of them were claimed to be dead and showed up alive later. But, they did get quite a few. It seems they were less successful with the civilian political leadership. And Pezeshkian, in his interview, seemed to indicate that it was almost luck that saved some of the Iranian political figures. He didn't go into details of that. But they did not have as much penetration as they needed to affect regime change. Also, I think they really misunderstood the sentiment of the Iranian people, and what obviously became, rather than a destabilized regime, what actually happened was a rallying around the flag. The people of Iran supporting their government, many who might not have otherwise, because they saw they were under attack by malicious, foreign Israeli and American powers. So what is, it's obvious that Trump stepped in, dropped a few bombs, declared victory, and then demanded a ceasefire. And Iran took it because they weren't ready. They didn't, while they believed they could win a long war of attrition, of long-range strikes with Israel, and I think things were trending in that direction, which is why the U.S. stepped in, but that they weren't going to risk an all-out war with the U.S. if there was a way out. We have seen several pantomime attacks, a couple of them during the Blinken and Sullivan administration that preceded Trump, all right, where the U.S. and Iran worked out face-saving pantomime attacks, on each other, with forecasted shots and so forth. And this seemed to almost be an extension. So there's kind of a long history there. I believe that, it seems that Trump, through a combination of Netanyahu and his own war hawk neocons, Israel firsters around him, convinced him that the regime change, by decapitation strike was a real thing. And when that didn't work out, he had to step in to save Israel from more damage and economic damage, military damage, a lot more than they were letting on while it was going on. So what is Netanyahu doing now, right? And certainly he hasn't given up, right? He got so close. He got the U.S. to bomb Iran. Now he is there to convince Trump that the nuclear enrichment wasn't completely stopped, which is fairly obvious, because at the very least, forget how much damage was actually done to the facilities and wasn't. We don't know that for certain. We can speculate. There are some informed missile scientists and so forth who have put forward some solid speculation backed by facts, or backed by not facts. I should say extensive knowledge, but everything we don't know. But we've heard enough comments from the IAEA and others that Iran, at the very least, moved a significant amount of their enriched uranium out beforehand. So quite obviously, and we know that they, if the program, if it had been completely destroyed, if they lost every centrifuge, if all their facilities were destroyed, they shut the whole thing down a few years ago when the JCPOA came into effect, and then restarted the whole program when Trump ripped it up anyway, and which brought us to where we are. So you can't destroy the knowledge. You can't destroy the program. They can easily recreate it. And Netanyahu will be saying all of these things to Trump in an attempt to convince him to help. Oh, you're so great. Only you could do this. You're the only president who can save the world from nuclear armed mullahs. I mean, you can hear the arguments, the plays to Trump's narcissism and ego that really every world leader does when they're attempting to influence Trump, with no exceptions. Maybe the Chinese haven't played that game so much, but even the Russian president has, more subtly, I would say, than certainly Mark Rutte calling him daddy. But even Putin has tried to psychologically manipulate and play to Trump's narcissism. I think Netanyahu is a bit of an expert at it.
When it comes to Donald Trump, and we know that he's dealing with a lot of issues domestically, and one of the recent issues is the Epstein file and the way that it somehow is making some sort of chaos within MAGA, Make America Great Again. Dan Bongino is just talking about he wants to leave the government, and we know the difference he has with Pam Bondi, and we have Kash Patel in the whole. How do you think is that related to the Netanyahu's visit to the United States, or it's something different? Why does Donald Trump need to cover up the whole Epstein file? Is it because of himself, or because something beyond that? He's trying to protect the people who are close to Netanyahu, maybe.
Yeah, I don't. This is really outside of my area of focus, right? I think that I know that
I want your speculation, by the way, before
there
getting
is something there. Yeah. I mean, it seems pretty clear to me that there was strong connections with Israeli intelligence, that there was a lot of blackmail going on, that they were running some type of underage prostitution ring, that ultimately, tied back to Israel, Mossad and Israeli interests. And it seems likely that Trump is protecting himself because he there's plenty of video evidence of him with Epstein. So I doubt very much that Trump never availed himself of Epstein's, underage pimp services, and lots of people close to, IPAC interests in Washington and so forth. But I think that too much can be made of this. All right. Yes, it might be a matter domestically for a certain percentage of Trump's, shall we say, online activist base. But if you go into most American homes, they don't really know much about it or care, right? Including, most Republicans. I think that there is a tendency too much in the alt media to project their own beliefs onto a tiny percentage of MAGA and imagine that is, the groundswell of Trump's support. And I just don't believe that is the case. So I also question how much we can directly link whatever sordid nastiness went on with Epstein to wider geopolitical issues. And so is Netanyahu in Washington to help cover up the Epstein controversy. I doubt it. I think it probably has a lot more to do with the recent conflict and so forth. Maybe they, that is an added element or something they brought up as well. But I don't know for certain, and therefore I don't want to make too much out of speculation about what ultimately is, shall we say, more about some type of nasty corruption and criminal justice business than it is about international relations and strategic matters.
Mark, we had Donald Trump last week, and the week before, he was talking about stop sending weapons to Ukraine. And just in the aftermath of those talks, he said that we're going to send weapons to Ukraine. We're going to send 10 missiles. I don't know what does that mean to the defense system of Ukraine. It's so strange. It's so much talk. And is that going to change? Is that going to have any sort of influence on what's going on in the mind of Russians? Here is what he said, by the way, recently. It seems that on the part of Russian government, they were trying to downplay what Donald Trump said about the way that he's talking with Putin, that Putin is so nice to him, but nothing comes out of this sort of attitude on the part of Putin. Here is what he said, Mark.
A war that was a war that should have never happened, and a lot of people are dying, and it should end. And I don't know, we get a lot of bullshit thrown at us by Putin. For you want to know the truth, he's very nice all the time, but it turns out to be meaningless.
Do you want to sanction him? Lindsey Graham has a sanctions bill on Russia. Do you want him to move?
I'm looking at it. Yeah, no, I'm looking. The Senate is passed a very, very tough sanctions. But yeah, I'm looking at it.
He's talking about the sanctions that Lindsey Graham was preparing to go against Russia. And here is what Blumenthal said about in terms of those sanctions, Mark.
Just met with all of the European heads of state. I am so deeply moved and inspired by their commitment to the cause of freedom in Ukraine against Putin's murderous invasion, but also their gratitude to the United States for our support and for our Russian sanctions. It would impose bone-crushing penalties on China and India for buying Russian oil and fueling their war machine. Here in Rome, having just met with President Zelensky and all the European heads of state, more committed than ever.
So the target is not Russia, is China and India. He's talking, and Blumenthal is talking about bone-crushing sanctions on China and India. Your take on what's going on in Washington, do they really believe that they can go against India and China by these bone-crushing sanctions, bone-chilling sanctions?
Yeah, I mean, there are some extremely, you would be surprised how ill-informed major political figures and decision makers. I mean, to a very large extent, they regularly drink their own Kool-Aid, their own propaganda, their own myths about themselves and their place in the world. I mean, they believe that their sanctions war on Russia